Jamal stood in front of his class, the spotlight of the moment burning into his skin. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry, but he had prepared for this. He had practiced his lines 100 times. This was his chance to impress the class, to show them that he was more than the boy with the funny accent, the boy they'd always made fun of. His heart raced, and his legs felt like jelly as he adjusted the microphone. This was supposed to be his moment. But as soon as he opened his mouth, he felt it, the familiar sting of ridicule. The murmurs started softly, then grew louder, until the whole class was laughing. He could hear it all, the whispers, the mocking laughter, the snickers behind his back. His words, carefully rehearsed, felt like they were sticking in his throat. He stumbled over his sentence. "Why yo, I am just gonna say that." One student in the back, Sam, imitated his voice in a loud, exaggerated drawl. "Oh, I'm just gonna say that," he mocked. Laughter erupted. Jamal's face burned. He felt his stomach churn with humiliation. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor beneath him and never be seen again. But he couldn't. He had to keep going. He had to finish his presentation. But the words wouldn't come. He glanced at the teacher, Mr. Daniels, who was scribbling notes as if he hadn't noticed the mockery happening right before him. Jamal swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. He had done everything right. He had stayed up late working on this project. He had studied. He had practiced. He had a good idea. But now all he could hear was the mocking tone of his own voice, echoing in his ears. His accent. That was the problem. His accent. It wasn't American enough. It wasn't the right kind of English. It was something that people outside of his neighborhood couldn't understand. As the laughter continued, Jamal's thoughts began to swirl. Why couldn't they just see past the way I spoke? Why did it have to be about my accent? He wasn't dumb. He wasn't lazy. He had ideas that could change the world. But no matter how smart or articulate he tried to be, people only saw the way he said words, not the words themselves. It had always been like this, from the moment he could remember. His accent had been something that made him feel inferior, something that made him feel different in a world where everyone else seemed to fit in just fine. He forced himself to finish the presentation. His voice cracked with each word, but he powered through, even as he could see his classmates leaning over to whisper to each other, pointing at him. Jamal knew what they were saying. He had heard it 1,000 times, he talks so weird. What's up with his voice? Finally, it ended. Jamal rushed back to his seat, his hands trembling. He could barely look at anyone. As soon as he sat down, his best friend, Eric, nudged him with a sympathetic look. But that look only made Jamal feel worse. Eric tried to offer a comforting smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everyone in the class had heard it, seen it. Jamal felt exposed. Mr. Daniels, the teacher, tried to salvage the moment. "All right, good job, Jamal. Let's give him a round of applause for his effort." A few claps came from the front row, but most of the class just stared blankly. The applause felt hollow, like a desperate attempt to fill a void. Jamal felt his stomach turn again. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, judging him not for his ideas, but for the way he spoke. He wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the students packed up their things, eager to leave. Jamal gathered his belongings slowly, feeling like he was trapped in his own body. He didn't want to go to lunch. He didn't want to face the hallways where he would overhear whispers, or see Sam and his friends mock his voice behind his back. The constant taunting, the looks of confusion, the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, jabs, it all wore him down. Eric, noticing Jamal's retreat into himself, walked over. "Hey, man, I'm sorry about what happened back there." "You know how they are," Eric said quietly. Jamal didn't respond. He just shrugged, his eyes fixed on the floor. Eric tried again, "You did great up there. They're just ignorant. Don't let them get to you. But Jamal wasn't sure if he could brush it off this time. He had heard those words before. Don't let them get to you. It sounded so easy. But every day, he faced the same thing. The mockery, the rejection, the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, people only saw the way he spoke, not who he was. Jamal's mom, Simone, had always told him that his voice was something to be proud of, that his accent was part of what made him unique. She'd told him stories about growing up in the same neighborhood, how people used to look down on her too because of the way she talked. Simone had never let it bother her. But Jamal wasn't sure if he could follow her example anymore. The weight of their laughter felt unbearable. Later that night, Jamal sat on his bed, scrolling through his phone. He tried to shake off the embarrassment, but it lingered. He couldn't stop thinking about the way his classmates had laughed. The way they'd mocked him, even though he had tried his best. He opened his laptop and went to the TED Talk website. For a moment, he stared at the videos. Some of them were from people who came from all over the world. They didn't have perfect American accents. They spoke with thick British, Indian, and even African accents. And the audience loved them. They were celebrated for their diversity, for their unique perspectives. Jamal wondered if he could ever do something like that. Could he ever stand in front of a crowd and speak without fear? Could he take all the hate he felt and turn it into something powerful? He shut his laptop and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Maybe one day, he thought. Maybe one day I could stand in front of a big audience and show them that I'm more than my accent. But for now, all he could think about was the next day. The next class. The next time he'd be asked to speak. Would they laugh again? Would it always be like this? For a brief moment, Jamal felt like giving up. He wondered if it was even worth it to try anymore. But as the thought crossed his mind, he heard his mom's voice echoing in his head, "Your voice is your power, Jamal. Don't ever forget that." Maybe his voice was his power after all. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jamal sat at the dinner table, the smell of fried chicken and collard greens filling the air. His mom, Simone, was humming softly as she stirred a pot on the stove, her movements steady and rhythmic. She had always been the anchor in his life, the one person who could make him feel like everything would be okay, even when the world seemed like it was falling apart. "Jamal, pass me the salt, baby," Simone called out, breaking his concentration. Jamal reached for the salt shaker, his mind drifting back to the events at school earlier that day. As he handed it over to her, he noticed the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way her hands moved with such purpose, as if everything she did had a reason. He loved these moments, the ones when life felt simple and steady. But even in the safety of his home, something had changed for him. He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, the world outside would always judge him for something he couldn't control. Simone noticed the faraway look on her son's face. She set the pot down on the counter, her smile fading into concern. "What's wrong, Jamal? You've been quiet all evening." Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I don't know, Mom. School was rough today." Simone raised an eyebrow, her intuition always sharp. "What happened?" Jamal hesitated. It wasn't easy for him to talk about these things, especially when it felt like nothing was ever going to change. But his mom had always been there for him, and he needed someone to listen. He took a deep breath and began. They mocked me again. My accent. In front of the whole class. They laughed and made fun of the way I talk. It was embarrassing, Mom." Simone didn't respond immediately. She placed the salt shaker down and walked over to him, sitting down beside him at the table. "Come here, baby," she said gently, pulling him into a hug. "I know it's hard, but you have to remember something, your accent, the way you speak, it's part of who you are. It's part of where you come from. Jamal closed his eyes, leaning into his mother's embrace. But why do they have to make fun of it? Why does it matter? Why can't they just hear what I'm saying, not how I'm saying it? Simone sighed, rubbing his back gently. Because, Jamal, sometimes people make fun of what they don't understand. They see someone who's different from them, and they feel threatened by it. They don't know how to handle it, so they laugh. It doesn't make it right, but that's how some people are. It's up to you to rise above it, to show them that your voice has value. Jamal pulled away slightly, looking into his mother's eyes. I don't know if I can, Mom. It's like every time I open my mouth, they only hear the way I talk, not what I'm saying. I feel like I'm always being judged. Simone nodded, her expression soft but firm. I know it's hard, baby. But listen to me, I grew up just like you, in a neighborhood where people would judge me for the way I spoke. They thought my accent made me less than them, that I was uneducated or not worth listening to. But I didn't let that stop me. I got my degree. I built a life. And every step of the way, I carried my accent with pride, because it's part of my story, part of my journey. Jamal looked at her, his heart swelling with a mix of admiration and frustration. But it's different now, Mom. People don't care about that. They care about fitting in. And I don't fit in. Simone smiled gently. Jamal, fitting in isn't as important as being true to yourself. You have to find strength in who you are, not in trying to be someone else. I'll tell you a story. When I was younger, I worked at a grocery store in the neighborhood. I was the only one with an accent like mine, and I remember one customer, a lady who came in every week. One day, she said to me, "You talk funny." At first, it hurt. But then I realized, I wasn't going to change the way I spoke to make her feel comfortable. And that day, I stood a little taller. I spoke a little clearer. And from that moment on, I never apologized for my voice again. Jamal nodded slowly, taking in his mom's words. He knew she had gone through her own struggles. As a young black woman trying to make a life in a world that often didn't appreciate her, she had fought for every inch of respect she earned. He had always admired her strength, but now, hearing her speak about her own battles, it made him wonder if he could find that same strength within himself. I get it, Mom, Jamal said quietly. But what if I'm just not meant for this? What if I'm never going to be enough? Simone's eyes softened. She reached out and cupped his chin, lifting his gaze to meet hers. You are more than enough, Jamal. You've always been. The world doesn't get to decide your worth. Only you get to do that. Don't let anyone tell you that your voice isn't important. You have a lot to say, and people need to hear it, especially people who think they can't speak up because of the way they sound. Jamal swallowed, trying to hold back the emotions rising in his chest. He had always known his mom was strong, but hearing her speak with such conviction made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could be strong too. Simone smiled and stood up, heading back to the stove to finish preparing dinner. You'll see, Jamal. One day, people will understand. They'll hear your voice, and they'll realize how much power it holds. Just like I did. Jamal watched her for a moment, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe he wasn't meant to fit in. Maybe he wasn't meant to sound like everyone else. But he could still find his place in this world, in his own way, with his own voice. As they sat down to eat, Jamal couldn't help but think about the future. Maybe he wasn't ready yet, but one day, he would stand tall and proud. One day, he would make the world see him for who he truly was, a boy with big dreams, a boy who had something to say. And that, Jamal realized, was something worth fighting for. The days after Jamal's presentation were a blur of whispers and side glances. His classmates, though they didn't mock him as openly anymore, treated him differently. He could feel their stares as he walked the hallways, their judgment hanging in the air. No matter how many times he tried to act like it didn't bother him, it did. It always did. Every time he opened his mouth in class, it felt like the weight of their expectations pressed down on him. They didn't just want him to speak, they wanted him to sound like them. They wanted him to sound normal. But Jamal knew, deep down, that he could never meet that expectation. He could never erase the way his voice had shaped him, the way it connected him to his family, to his roots. He could never make himself fit in that way. That afternoon, as he walked out of his English class, Jamal was caught off guard by a voice calling his name. "Yo, Jamal, wait up." It was Sam, the guy who had mocked him during the presentation. Jamal stopped in his tracks, his stomach tightening. He hadn't expected Sam to come after him. Sam was a popular guy, always surrounded by a group of friends, always with something to say. And the last thing Jamal wanted to deal with right now was another round of mocking. "Yeah," Jamal said, his voice tight. He forced himself to turn around. Sam grinned, walking up to him with his usual swagger. "Hey man, sorry about the whole thing the other day," he said, his tone light and almost apologetic. "I didn't mean to come off like that. I was just messing around, you know." Jamal raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to make of this sudden change in attitude. "Messing around," he repeated, his voice flat. He wasn't buying it. Sam had humiliated him in front of the entire class. It wasn't something that could just be brushed off with a few words. "Yeah, I didn't mean to make you feel bad," Sam continued, scratching the back of his head nervously. "It's just, you've got this, unique accent. It's different, and I thought it was funny. But I get it, man. I didn't think it would hurt you like that. I was just being stupid." Jamal clenched his jaw, biting back the frustration that was rising in him. Sam's apology felt shallow, like he was trying to make himself feel better rather than genuinely acknowledging the pain he had caused. "You don't get it," Jamal said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get it because you don't have to live with it every day. You don't have to feel like people are judging you just because you sound different. It's not funny. It never was." Sam's smile faltered slightly, and he shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, I guess I didn't really think about it that way. I didn't mean to make you feel like crap, Jamal. Really, I didn't." Jamal looked away, his eyes fixed on the ground for a moment. He wanted to believe Sam, he really did. But it wasn't just Sam who had made him feel less than. It was everyone. The whispers, the jokes, the subtle glances, those were the things that chipped away at his confidence every single day. "You don't get to just apologize and pretend everything's fine," Jamal said, his voice hard now. "This isn't something that's going to go away just because you said sorry. I have to deal with this every day. Every time I speak, every time I try to say something, I feel like everyone's waiting for me to mess up. I feel like I'm not good enough." Sam fell silent for a moment, the weight of Jamal's words settling in. "I didn't know it was that bad," he said, his voice quieter now. "I'm sorry, man. I'll try to do better." Jamal nodded curtly, not sure if Sam's apology was sincere, but it didn't really matter. He wasn't looking for Sam's approval anymore. He was looking for something more, something that could make him feel whole, something that could make him feel like he wasn't alone in this. He turned to walk away, his mind already racing ahead to the next class. But as he took a step, he heard Sam's voice one more time. "Hey, Jamal, one last thing." Jamal stopped but didn't turn around. He waited, feeling the tension rising again in the pit of his stomach. "Look, no, I'm not exactly a good example of, how to be cool or whatever," Sam said, almost awkwardly. "But, maybe you should just embrace your accent, don't let people get to you. People are always gonna find something to pick on. Maybe if you owned it, they wouldn't think it's so funny anymore." Jamal blinked, taken aback. Was this actually advice coming from Sam? He had never thought of it that way. "You think so?" he asked, unsure. Sam shrugged, a little sheepishly. I mean, yeah. You've got something that makes you stand out. People like that, don't they? Like, maybe you should use it to your advantage. Don't hide it. Jamal thought about it for a moment. Use it to my advantage? It was an interesting thought, one that he hadn't considered. Could he really turn something that had been a source of pain into something powerful? He wasn't sure, but he had to admit, it was worth thinking about. Thanks, I guess, Jamal said, finally turning to leave. I'll think about it. As he walked away, Jamal felt a small spark of something unfamiliar, hope. Maybe, just maybe, Sam had a point. Maybe he could take control of his own story. Maybe his accent wasn't something to be ashamed of, but something to be proud of. But as Jamal turned the corner, he couldn't help but wonder if this would be enough. Could he really change the way people saw him? Could he really stand tall in a world that seemed so set on tearing him down? He wasn't sure. But one thing was for certain, he wasn't going to let the mockery define him anymore. Jamal's world shifted in ways he hadn't expected. It wasn't immediate or even dramatic at first, but over time, the subtle changes began to take hold. He started to walk with a little more confidence, his shoulders a little straighter, his head held a little higher. The teasing, the whispers, they still happened, of course. But now, when they came, Jamal didn't shrink back. Instead, he faced them head-on, like a boxer who had learned to roll with the punches. It wasn't that the teasing didn't hurt anymore. It still did, like an old wound that would flare up if you touched it too hard. But Jamal was learning how to live with it, how to embrace the discomfort and keep moving forward. Sam's words echoed in his mind, maybe you should just embrace your accent, you know. And for the first time, Jamal considered that maybe Sam was right. Maybe his accent wasn't something to hide from, but something to be proud of. His mom's voice resonated with him too, your voice has value. Those words were beginning to sink in. His voice, his accent, his way of speaking, these things made him who he was. They were a part of him, woven into his identity like the fabric of his life. And he wasn't going to let anyone make him feel ashamed of it. But there was still a big question hanging over Jamal, what now? As he stood in front of his mirror that evening, practicing his speech for an upcoming class presentation, Jamal realized something. For so long, he had been terrified of speaking. The thought of stuttering, of mispronouncing words, of sounding different, it had kept him silent in so many situations. But now, there was a new fire burning inside him. He was tired of hiding. He was tired of being quiet. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his notes. He had signed up to give a presentation for the upcoming school assembly, a speech about his journey, about the struggles he had faced growing up in a neighborhood where everyone expected him to sound a certain way. He wanted to tell them that his accent didn't make him less than anyone else. He wanted to show them that there was strength in being different. The night before the assembly, Jamal lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't help but think of the people who would be sitting in the auditorium, watching him. The same kids who had mocked him for his accent, the same ones who had laughed at his expense. They would all be there, and he would be standing in front of them, speaking in a way that made him feel vulnerable and exposed. But this time, it wasn't going to be about them. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving something to himself. This was his moment, his chance to show the world who Jamal really was. The next day, when Jamal walked into the assembly hall, the nerves hit him like a tidal wave. His stomach twisted in knots, his palms grew clammy. He could see the sea of faces in front of him, some familiar, some not, and he felt his heartbeat speed up. It was now or never. There was no turning back. He walked up to the stage, the bright lights blinding him momentarily. He glanced down at his notes, then up at the audience, and in that instant, he felt the weight of their gazes. His legs wobbled for a moment, but then he took a deep breath and opened his mouth. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady but soft. "My name is Jamal, and I want to talk to you about something that's been a part of me for as long as I can remember, my accent. The silence in the room was thick. He could almost hear the whisper of curiosity in the air. Jamal paused, gathering his thoughts. This was it. This was the moment he had been preparing for. When I was younger, I used to hate the way I sounded. I used to think that if I could just change the way I spoke, maybe people would stop laughing at me. I thought if I could sound like everyone else, I would finally fit in. But the older I got, the more I realized something: I don't have to change for anyone. My voice is a part of who I am. It's a part of my story. Jamal's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces. He saw Sam in the back, his arms crossed, but his expression was different now. It wasn't mocking, it was something like curiosity, maybe even respect. Jamal's heart beat a little faster, but it didn't matter. He wasn't speaking to Sam anymore. He was speaking to everyone. To anyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. I grew up in a place where people didn't always understand me. They didn't always want to hear what I had to say. And I'm not gonna lie, there were times when I wanted to just disappear, to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. But then I started to think about all the things I had to offer, my thoughts, my dreams, my experiences. And none of those things have anything to do with how I sound. Jamal paused again, his breath catching in his throat. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the passion building inside him. My accent is part of my identity. It's part of my family, my culture, my history. It's not something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. And it's time that we all stop letting other people decide what we're worth. It's time we stop letting other people's opinions define us. Jamal's words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was completely still. Then, slowly, the silence was broken by a single clap. It was Sam. The applause slowly spread through the room, hesitant at first, but growing louder with each passing second. Jamal's heart swelled, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. He finished his speech, the words coming more easily now. So, to anyone out there who feels like they're not enough, who feels like their voice doesn't matter, know that it does. You matter. Your voice matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The applause was thunderous. Jamal stood there, breathless, his heart pounding. The crowd's response was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the applause, it was about the fact that for the first time, he felt like he had truly been heard. As Jamal walked off the stage, the weight of his emotions hit him all at once. The fear, the doubt, the loneliness, it all seemed to fade away. He had just taken a huge step. He had stepped into his own power, and he was never going to look back. But this was just the beginning. Jamal knew that. He was ready to face whatever came next, because now, he knew that his voice mattered, no matter how it sounded. Jamal walked off the stage, the roar of the applause still echoing in his ears, but inside, a whirlwind of emotions raged. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of excitement, relief, and something else, a quiet, simmering pride. He had done it. He had stood before an audience that had once mocked him, and he had made them listen. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had control over his own narrative. But as he made his way back to his seat in the audience, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was unfolding. The feeling lingered, creeping over him like a shadow. What had just happened? Was it enough? Would it really change anything? When the assembly ended and the students filtered out of the hall, Jamal found himself walking alone toward the exit, his mind still buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. He didn't notice at first, but as he reached the door, he was stopped by a familiar voice. Jamal. Hey, wait up. It was Sam. Jamal stopped, surprised to see him again so soon. Sam had been one of the loudest voices in mocking him before, but now, as Jamal looked at him, he saw something different. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just a quiet, earnest expression on Sam's face. I gotta say, man, I didn't expect that. That was, Sam hesitated, searching for the right words. That was powerful. Honestly, I didn't know you had it in you. Jamal raised an eyebrow, still a little cautious. You didn't know. You didn't think I had it in me. Sam shifted uncomfortably but didn't look away. I mean, yeah. I used to think you were. I dunno, just the guy with the accent, you know. But that speech, wow. You just owned it. You didn't let anyone stop you. I get it now. Jamal studied Sam for a moment, unsure of what to make of his words. Was this real? Was this some sort of joke, some backhanded compliment disguised as a kind of apology? Sam seemed to sense the hesitation. I know I messed up before. I can't change that. But I just wanted to say that I see you now, Jamal. I see what you've been going through. And I respect you for standing up the way you did. Jamal nodded slowly, his heart still beating fast. Thanks, Sam. It means a lot, really. Sam's eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of their shared history hung between them, unspoken. Then, in a quiet voice, Sam added, you know, if you ever need someone to talk to about this, or just anything. I'm here. Jamal was stunned by the sincerity in Sam's words. He had never expected this kind of shift. The guy who had once been a part of the group that had mocked him now seemed like someone who genuinely understood. I'll keep that in mind, Jamal said, still processing the change in their dynamic. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Sam broke the tension with a small grin. You're gonna do big things, man. I can tell. Jamal didn't know what to say. His mind was racing. This moment, felt like a turning point. He had made an impact today, not just with his speech, but with his presence, his authenticity. But as he turned and started walking out of the school, he couldn't ignore the feeling that his journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next few days were a blur of texts, social media posts, and murmurs in the hallways. Jamal had gone viral. His speech had been shared countless times on social media, and before he knew it, his words were reaching people far beyond his school. People from other cities, states, even countries, were commenting on his post. They shared their own stories of struggling with their identities, with their voices. They all seemed to be saying the same thing, your words gave me strength. Your voice matters. But amidst the flood of positive messages, there were the inevitable critics. The ones who couldn't understand why Jamal had spoken out, the ones who couldn't accept that someone who didn't sound like them could be powerful. They left hateful comments, calling him names, mocking his accent all over again. At first, Jamal was disheartened. He had hoped that his message would bring people together, that it would help bridge the gap between them. But as the negativity started to roll in, he felt like the walls were closing in again. The familiar sting of judgment returned, a bitter reminder that some people would never understand. Then, one night, as Jamal sat at his desk, scrolling through the endless comments, his mom came into his room, a soft knock on the door before she entered. You alright, baby? She asked, her voice gentle. Jamal didn't look up immediately. He was reading another comment that made his stomach twist. Who cares about your accent? Stop acting like a victim and move on. I'm fine, Mom, he muttered, closing his phone and tossing it on his bed. Just tired. His mom walked over and sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Don't let them get to you, she said quietly. You've come so far already. Jamal looked up at her, his eyes filled with frustration. But they don't get it, Mom. They'll never get it. I'm not like them. I know, baby, she said softly. But that's exactly why your voice matters. Because you're not like them. You're you. And that's powerful. The world needs to hear your voice, even if it's hard for some people to understand. Jamal sat back, letting her words sink in. His mom was right. He couldn't expect everyone to understand, but that didn't mean he should stop speaking. The world had a place for him, just as he was, accent and all. With a deep breath, Jamal opened his phone again. He scrolled past the hateful comments, the negativity, and found one post that stood out, a message from a girl named Amina, who had written, "Your words helped me find my voice. I've always been ashamed of the way I speak. I've always tried to hide it, to blend in. But after hearing you, I know that my voice is mine to own. Thank you for giving me courage." Jamal smiled, his heart lightening. There it was, the reason he had to keep going. For people like Amina. For everyone who had ever felt small because of how they spoke, where they came from, or what they looked like. He took a deep breath, determined to keep pushing forward. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but now, Jamal knew one thing for sure, he wasn't walking it alone. The days after Jamal's speech passed in a haze of both triumph and challenge. He had never imagined that speaking his truth would ignite such a firestorm of reactions, positive and negative alike. But the storm had settled, and now, he was left with the quiet aftermath of what he had done. The positive messages continued to flood in, and he had found a sense of community he hadn't expected. People he'd never met reached out, telling him how much his words had impacted them, how they had felt seen and heard for the first time. But the harsh comments, the criticism, the remnants of those who couldn't understand, those lingered too, though not as loudly. They were quieter now, like distant thunder, but they still existed. At times, when Jamal would scroll through his phone or glance at the news feed, a cold knot would form in his stomach. He hadn't expected it to be easy, but sometimes, it felt overwhelming. One afternoon, as Jamal sat in the kitchen doing his homework, his mother walked in, carrying a tray of sandwiches. She set them down in front of him and sat beside him at the table. "You've been so quiet lately," she observed, her voice soft but knowing. "I know it's been a lot. But how are you feeling?" Jamal didn't immediately respond. He had been lost in thought, staring at his textbook but not really reading. It had been a week since the assembly, a week since his viral TED Talk, and he still felt like he was processing everything. "I don't know, Mom," he admitted finally, rubbing his eyes. "I'm happy people are listening, and I'm grateful for the support, but I just feel like the work isn't done. There's still so much more to say, but it feels like I'm getting pulled in all these different directions. I can't stop thinking about all the people who still don't get it. And the ones who probably never will." His mom nodded slowly. "It's not easy, baby. I can't pretend to know what you're going through. But I do know this, you've already started something. You've started a conversation. And that's not something you can undo, no matter what others say. You've made an impact." Jamal thought about that for a moment. His mom had always been the steady rock in his life, always knowing the right thing to say. She had always reminded him of the value of his voice, but now, he felt like he was starting to believe it too. For the first time, Jamal wasn't just speaking for the sake of others. He was speaking for himself. His voice, his accent, his identity, had worth, even if some people didn't understand it. He took a deep breath and smiled at his mom. "I know, Mom. But sometimes, it's just hard to let go of the negativity. It feels like it's always there, no matter how much good is out there too." "I get that," she said, her hand gently squeezing his. "But remember, you're not in this alone. You've got people who are with you, rooting for you. And sometimes, it's about doing what you can, and then letting go of the things you can't change. Don't let the negativity drown out the good." Jamal nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Maybe his mom was right. Maybe it wasn't about trying to change everyone's mind. It wasn't his job to convince the people who didn't want to listen. His job was to continue being himself, authentic, unapologetic, and proud. That evening, as he lay in bed, Jamal thought back on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the teasing, the laughter, the isolation he had felt as a child. He thought about how he had tried to hide his accent, how he had wished he could speak like everyone else. And then, he thought about that moment on the stage, the words he had spoken, and the overwhelming support that followed. He had made it through the hardest part. He had taken the first step toward owning his story, and in doing so, he had inspired others to do the same. Jamal rolled over to his nightstand and picked up his phone, scrolling through the messages again. One caught his eye, another message from Amina, the girl who had written to him earlier. This time, she had included a picture of herself, smiling in front of a mirror with the caption, "I'm learning to love the way I speak, just like you taught me to. Thanks, Jamal." A lump rose in Jamal's throat as he stared at the image. He didn't know Amina, but he knew her story. She had felt the same way he had, and now, they were connected by something bigger than their differences. He replied to her message, simply, "You've got this. I'm proud of you." As Jamal put his phone down and closed his eyes, he realized something important. This wasn't just about him anymore. His voice had created a ripple, one that was reaching people he'd never met. And in the process, he had learned something profound, that no matter how different you are, no matter how much the world might try to push you down or tell you to be silent, there is always power in speaking your truth. The next morning, as Jamal got ready for school, he found himself standing a little taller in front of the mirror. He wasn't the same boy who had walked into that assembly hall a week ago. He had changed, not in the way people might expect, but in the way that mattered most. He had learned to love himself just as he was. Walking out of his room, he could hear his mom's voice calling from downstairs. "You ready to go, baby?" Jamal smiled, feeling the familiar rush of warmth in his chest. "Yeah, Mom. I'm ready." And for the first time, he wasn't just ready to face the world, he was ready to own it. The days after Jamal's TED Talk were nothing short of transformative. It seemed as though the world had taken notice, and for the first time, Jamal's voice wasn't something he wished he could hide, it was something that he owned, something that resonated with others. He had always been self-conscious about his accent, constantly worried that it made him less American or less intelligent in the eyes of others. But now, as the viral video of his speech continued to spread across social media, Jamal realized that his voice, his identity, was more than just an accent. It was a part of who he was, and there was beauty in that. The overwhelming support kept coming in. People from all walks of life, students, teachers, professionals, and even celebrities, left comments or sent messages telling him how his words had touched them. Many shared their own struggles with language, accent, or identity, and Jamal could see that his story was part of something larger, something that connected people from different backgrounds. But there was one message that stood out in particular, a message from someone Jamal had never expected to hear from. It was from Mrs. Thompson, his high school English teacher, the very same woman who had once corrected his improper use of grammar in front of the class. The woman who, when he had been younger, made him feel like his accent was a disadvantage. Her message read, "Jamal, I have to admit, I never truly understood the struggles you faced until now. Watching your TED Talk opened my eyes to something I hadn't seen before. I want you to know that I admire your courage and your strength. You've taught me something invaluable, thank you for showing me that there's no right way to speak. We all have our own stories to tell, and your voice is just as powerful as anyone else's. I'm proud of you." Jamal read the message 3 times before he could even respond. Mrs. Thompson had been one of the teachers who had made him feel inadequate for so long. But now, she was admitting that she had been wrong, and that was a powerful thing. In a way, her apology wasn't just for him, it was for every student she had ever dismissed or made to feel less than because of their accent, their background, or their way of speaking. Jamal's response was simple but sincere, "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That means more than you know." As he put his phone down, Jamal felt something stir within him. It wasn't just validation, it was a realization. His story, his experience, was something worth sharing. He could no longer remain in the background, silently suffering from his insecurities. The world was waiting for voices like his, voices that had been silenced for far too long. But even as Jamal embraced his newfound sense of self-worth, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the work was far from over. The next day at school, he overheard a group of students laughing in the hallway. Their laughter wasn't malicious, but the words they were speaking, mocking accents, laughing at the way people spoke, sent a chill down his spine. Jamal paused, unsure whether to approach them or let it go. But as he thought about how far he had come, he knew he couldn't stay silent. He walked up to the group, his heart racing, and without thinking too much about it, he spoke. "Hey, why are you guys laughing? What's so funny about someone's accent?" The group stopped mid-laugh, turning to face him. There was an awkward silence for a moment. Then one of the students, a boy named Kyle, spoke up. We weren't making fun of anyone, man. We were just messing around." Jamal took a deep breath. Messing around? That's what it always sounds like, right? Just a joke. But you don't realize that for some of us, it's not funny. It's a part of who we are. It's how we communicate, it's our culture. So yeah, it hurts. Kyle looked taken aback, as if the weight of Jamal's words was just starting to sink in. "I didn't think of it that way," he said quietly. Jamal nodded. "It's all good, man. Just think before you laugh at something that's not yours to laugh at, all right?" The group stood in stunned silence for a moment, and then slowly, they nodded. No one said anything more, but Jamal knew that he had planted a seed. He had spoken up, and maybe, just maybe, he had made them see things from a different perspective. As Jamal walked away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He wasn't just speaking to the masses through his TED Talk or through social media anymore, he was speaking to the people around him. He was changing minds, one conversation at a time. The next few weeks were a blur of interviews, social media campaigns, and speaking engagements. Jamal had become something of a local hero, but he never let it get to his head. Every time he spoke, whether in front of a classroom or at a conference, he reminded himself why he was doing this, not for fame or attention, but for those who had been silenced, for those whose voices were dismissed because of where they came from or how they spoke. One afternoon, as he sat with his mom in their kitchen, he reflected on how much had changed. "You're not the same boy who walked into that assembly a few weeks ago," his mom said, her voice full of pride. "I can see it in your eyes. You've come into your own." Jamal smiled, looking at her with gratitude. "Yeah, I guess I have. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong because of how they speak, or where they come from. I'm just one voice in this, but it feels like I'm finally part of something bigger." His mom nodded. "That's the power of speaking your truth, baby. When you speak from the heart, others will hear you. And when you lead with kindness, you'll inspire change." Jamal's phone buzzed on the table, and he picked it up to see a message from Amina again, the girl who had reached out to him after his TED Talk. "Jamal, I wanted to let you know that I'm starting a club at my school for students who feel marginalized because of their accents or their backgrounds. We're calling it Voices Unheard. I want to thank you again for giving me the courage to start this. You gave me a voice." Jamal's heart swelled with pride as he read her message. This was it. This was what he had wanted all along, not just to speak for himself, but to give others the courage to speak up too. He replied, "That's amazing, Amina. You're doing exactly what I hope to do. Keep it up. I'm proud of you." Jamal put his phone down and looked at his mom, who was smiling at him with that same knowing look. "You're changing the world, one voice at a time," she said softly. Jamal took a deep breath, feeling the weight of those words settle into his heart. He wasn't done yet. There was still so much work to be done, so many more stories to share. But now, he knew that his voice, his unique, unapologetic voice, had the power to inspire real change. And that was just the beginning. It had been a few months since Jamal's TED Talk had gone viral, and his life had transformed in ways he couldn't have predicted. He had become a symbol for authenticity, a voice for the voiceless. People, especially those from marginalized communities, reached out to him with their stories, expressing how his words had helped them overcome their own struggles. It felt like a tidal wave of change was sweeping through his life, and although he was still trying to process everything, he could feel the momentum building. But with every wave of positivity came the undertow of negativity. While he'd been uplifted by the love and support he'd received, the criticisms and misunderstandings never quite faded away. Some people still mocked his accent or dismissed his accomplishments, unable, or unwilling, to see past their own biases. The more Jamal spoke out, the more he realized that fighting for respect and recognition would be a constant battle. One day, while waiting for his mom in the car after school, Jamal scrolled through his social media feed. He had learned to filter out most of the hateful comments by now, but one particular post caught his eye. It was from a YouTube personality, someone who had a large following, and it was a video that critiqued his TED Talk. The title read, "Why Jamal's TED Talk is Misleading, The Truth About Accent Pride." Jamal's stomach tightened. He clicked on the video, trying to brace himself for whatever criticism was coming. The YouTuber, a young man named Travis, began speaking with his usual, exaggerated humor. "I don't know about you guys," Travis said, grinning widely, "but I think this whole thing about being proud of your accent is just bizarre. I mean, can't we just speak properly and leave all this pride business behind?" He continued, making fun of the idea that someone's accent could hold any cultural or emotional significance. His words were laced with sarcasm, and the audience, mostly his young followers, laughed along. Jamal's heart sank. It wasn't that Travis was offering a well-thought-out critique. It was that the message was simple and clear: why should anyone be proud of something as insignificant as how they speak? It felt like a slap in the face, especially coming from someone with so much influence. Before he could dwell on it too long, his mom got into the car, interrupting his thoughts. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "Yeah," Jamal said, turning off the screen, "just some guy online making fun of my TED Talk. Nothing new." His mom sighed, looking at him with a soft, yet concerned, gaze. "I've seen those videos. You can't let people like that get to you. They don't understand. And they probably never will." "I know, but it still hurts," Jamal admitted, rubbing his forehead. "It's like no matter how much progress I make, there are still people out there who will just never get it. Who think it's all a joke." "Sweetheart," his mom said, placing a hand on his, "you've already won. You've reached so many people. You've sparked a conversation that wasn't happening before. That's more than most people will ever do." Jamal smiled faintly, appreciating his mom's unwavering support. But deep down, he knew she was right: there would always be critics. There would always be those who refused to understand. But there would also be others, just like Amina, who were ready to listen and change. That evening, Jamal sat at his desk, scrolling through more of the comments on his TED Talk video. Some were critical, but the majority were supportive. People were reaching out from all over the world, sharing their experiences, opening up about their struggles with language and identity. One message from a teacher in Australia stood out. "Jamal, I watched your TED Talk and it made me realize how much I've been suppressing my students' natural accents in class, thinking it would help them fit in. After watching your speech, I've decided to change the way I approach teaching. I'm going to let my students speak freely, without judgment. Thank you for showing me a different way." Jamal was overwhelmed. This wasn't just one person in a small town, it was someone across the world, in a completely different context, recognizing the value of his message. The impact was far-reaching, and that felt like something tangible, something real. As the days passed, Jamal started focusing more on his own growth. He continued speaking at local schools and attending interviews, but he also began mentoring younger students who were struggling with their own identity and voices. He was becoming a beacon of hope for those who felt silenced, teaching them that their differences were not something to hide, but to embrace. One afternoon, Jamal received an invitation to speak at a national conference on education, where educators and community leaders gathered to discuss issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The topic of his speech was simple: the power of embracing your voice. It was a topic that he was now passionate about, one that reflected everything he had learned on his journey. The invitation felt like another milestone, but it also felt like a challenge. Speaking at a national level would mean facing an even wider audience, people from all over the country, some of whom might not be as open to his message as those he had spoken to before. But Jamal was no longer afraid. He spent the next few weeks preparing for the speech, writing and rewriting his speech until every word felt like it came from the heart. When the day of the conference arrived, he stood backstage, feeling the weight of the moment. The lights were bright, and the crowd was large, but Jamal knew this was the moment he had been working toward. He was ready. When it was finally his turn to speak, Jamal walked onto the stage, the familiar nerves bubbling up inside him. But this time, instead of being overwhelmed, he took a deep breath, smiled, and began. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, his voice steady. "My name is Jamal, and I want to talk to you today about something that has been central to my life: the power of your voice. But not just any voice, your true voice, the one that comes from the core of who you are." He shared his journey, his struggles with his accent, his experience of being mocked, and how he had once wished to change the way he spoke. But he also shared the turning point, the moment when he realized that his voice was not a weakness, but a strength. "I used to think that if I changed the way I spoke, I'd be accepted. But what I've learned is that by embracing my true voice, I've found the courage to be myself. And that's the message I want to share with you today: don't let anyone tell you that the way you speak, the way you express yourself, is wrong. Your voice is powerful. It's the key to everything you want to achieve." The room was silent, hanging on every word. Jamal could feel the weight of his message resonating with the audience. When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. The applause wasn't just for his speech, it was for the truth he had shared, a truth that would continue to ripple out and inspire others. As Jamal stepped off the stage, he couldn't help but smile. He was no longer the boy who tried to hide his accent. He was the man who had learned to speak with pride, with purpose. And that was only the beginning. Jamal had always believed that change started with one person. But after his TED Talk, his experience on the national stage, and the conversations that followed, he realized that real change happens when we collectively decide to listen to each other and embrace our differences. As Jamal continued to grow in his newfound confidence, something began to shift around him as well. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about creating a space where everyone could feel seen, heard, and valued for who they truly were. He had been invited to speak at several more conferences, and each time he found himself telling a slightly different version of his story. He wasn't just talking about the pain of being judged for his accent, he was now talking about the joy and power that came from owning who you are, even when the world around you might try to tell you otherwise. But even as he spoke to larger audiences and shared his message of self-acceptance, Jamal knew there was still a deeper challenge ahead, one he hadn't fully anticipated. He had made a name for himself as an advocate for accent pride, but what would happen when those closest to him, the people he loved most, didn't fully understand or embrace the journey he was on? It was a Friday afternoon when Jamal's phone buzzed with a new message. He glanced at the screen and saw it was from his cousin, Tasha, who he hadn't spoken to in a while. "Yo, Jamal. I've been hearing about your TED Talk and all these interviews. You're blowing up. But can we talk about something real? Hit me up when you get the chance. It's important." Jamal paused for a moment, feeling a flicker of unease. Tasha had always been supportive, but he also knew that sometimes, people didn't really get what he was trying to do. He wondered if this message was going to be another one of those moments where someone close to him had a well-meaning but misguided opinion about his newfound activism. He replied quickly, "Yeah, let's talk. What's on your mind?" About an hour later, Tasha called. Her voice was full of energy, but there was something underlying her tone, a kind of concern that made Jamal sit up straighter. "Hey, I just watched your TED Talk again," Tasha said. "And I gotta be real with you. I'm proud of you and everything, but I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out where you're coming from. All this stuff about accent pride, isn't it kinda divisive?" Jamal felt a knot in his stomach. He took a deep breath before responding, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean?" "I mean, like, it's cool that you found your voice, and I respect that. But I'm worried that all this talk about accents, doesn't it just make people more aware of their differences? Shouldn't we just focus on what brings us together, instead of drawing lines between people based on how they speak?"
Jamal felt his heart sink. He knew where this conversation was heading, and he couldn't help but feel a wave of frustration. It wasn't that he didn't understand where Tasha was coming from. In many ways, she was like a lot of people who thought that talking about things like accents or cultural identity could create division. But for Jamal, it wasn't about division, it was about embracing the richness of diversity. "Tasha, I get it. I really do," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. "But here's the thing, it's not about focusing on differences in a way that separates us. It's about recognizing and celebrating the things that make us unique. I spent so many years hiding my accent, trying to sound like someone else, and all that did was make me feel like I wasn't enough. I'm not asking people to make a big deal about it. I'm just asking them to understand that it matters, to me, and to a lot of people who feel the same way." Tasha was quiet for a moment, and Jamal could hear her breathing softly on the other end. "I see what you're saying," she said finally. "But I still don't know if I fully understand it. Maybe it's because I've never had to deal with something like that. You know, I never thought about my accent as something that could hold me back." Jamal sighed. "And that's the thing, Tasha. Some of us do. And I've spent so many years thinking I wasn't good enough because I sounded different. And now that I'm speaking out about it, I'm hoping that other people who feel the same way can find their own voice, too." There was another pause before Tasha responded. "You're right, Jamal. I can't really understand what it's like to go through that. But I'll try to be better about it. And hey, I'm proud of you for finding something you're passionate about. Just don't forget the people who've always been there for you, you know?" Jamal smiled, his frustration easing. "I won't forget, Tasha. And I appreciate you hearing me out." As the conversation ended, Jamal leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to reflect. He realized that he had been so focused on the bigger picture, on the viral success of his talk and the message he was spreading, that he hadn't truly considered how the people closest to him might be processing it. Tasha wasn't alone in her confusion. Many people in his life had likely never thought about their accents as barriers or burdens. But for Jamal, and many others, it had always been a silent struggle.
The conversation with Tasha wasn't just a turning point for him in his relationship with her, it was a moment of realization. He couldn't expect everyone to understand his journey immediately. But that didn't mean he couldn't continue to share his story. If anything, this was more proof that the work he was doing was important. It wasn't just about changing the minds of strangers, it was about making sure those closest to him understood the depth of what he was advocating for. And maybe, just maybe, they'd start to see it, too. The next few weeks were filled with more reflection and conversations, some difficult, others uplifting, as Jamal continued to navigate his growing platform. He received emails from teachers, community leaders, and parents who had started to see the impact of accent pride in their own lives. But he also received messages from individuals like Tasha, people close to him, who struggled to fully grasp what he was fighting for. For Jamal, it was clear, the journey ahead was as much about educating the people around him as it was about sharing his message on a larger scale. It wasn't enough to simply talk about the power of his voice, he needed to make others see that their voices, too, were worth celebrating. Because no matter how small the ripple, it could spark a tidal wave of change. As Jamal's voice grew louder, his message of accent pride and cultural identity resonated more deeply with people across the country. Invitations to speak came in fast and furious, from schools, conferences, and even social media campaigns that were focused on amplifying voices from marginalized communities. With every platform that offered him the opportunity to speak, Jamal could feel himself changing. He was no longer just the boy who struggled with his accent, he was now a leader, a spokesperson for an idea that was taking root in a lot of hearts. But as his platform grew, so did the complexities of the mission he had taken on. The more Jamal spoke, the more he realized how deeply ingrained societal biases were, and how difficult it could be to challenge them, even with something as simple as an accent. He was having conversations that were both encouraging and frustrating, trying to balance being an advocate for self-empowerment while also navigating the reality that not everyone agreed with him.
One evening, after a long day of interviews and speaking events, Jamal found himself sitting alone in his room, scrolling through social media. He had been checking messages from followers, people who thanked him for changing their perspective, for making them feel seen. But then, amidst the sea of positive comments, one message caught his eye. It was from an old acquaintance, Marcus, someone from Jamal's past who had always been a bit of a skeptic. "Hey Jamal, saw your TED Talk. Gotta say, you've come a long way since we were in school together. But this whole accent pride thing, don't you think you're just looking for problems that don't exist? I mean, people have to speak clearly, and honestly, your accent doesn't make it easy to take you seriously. Just my 2 cents. Don't take it personally." Jamal's stomach twisted as he read the message. It was the kind of message he had been receiving all along, but this one hit differently. This wasn't some random internet troll, it was someone he had once considered a friend. Someone who had watched him grow up. And this time, the words stung. He sat with his thoughts for a long while, unable to shake the feeling of frustration that bubbled up inside him. Was it so difficult for people to understand the importance of what he was advocating for? To recognize that accents weren't just about communication, they were about culture, about identity, about who someone was at their core? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a call from his mom. "Hey, baby, how's it going?" she asked. Jamal sighed, leaning back against the headboard of his bed. "You wouldn't believe the message I just got." "Who's it from?" "Marcus." His mom's voice softened. "Ah. I see. What did he say?" Jamal recounted the message, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's like, I'm doing all this work, trying to help people embrace who they are, and then there's always someone like Marcus who thinks it's all just about making problems where none exist. I'm starting to wonder if it's even worth it." "Jamal, you're doing something important," his mom said, her voice firm yet soothing. "I know it's tough. I know it feels like some people just won't get it. But remember, your journey isn't for them. It's for the ones who feel what you're saying, who need to hear it. And those are the people you're really helping."
Jamal smiled a little, grateful for his mom's unwavering support. But even so, it didn't erase the doubt that lingered in the back of his mind. Was his message truly making a difference, or was he just preaching to the choir? He had to admit, there were times when the obstacles felt insurmountable, when the message seemed lost on too many people. The next day, Jamal had another interview scheduled. It was for a well-known talk show that reached millions of viewers. As he prepared his notes, he found himself reflecting on the struggles that had come with this new chapter of his life. Yes, there were wins, there were countless people telling him that his talk had made a difference. But there were also people like Marcus, who just couldn't see past their own biases. Despite the doubts, Jamal knew he couldn't back down. He had a responsibility now, not just to himself, but to the people who were still learning to embrace their authentic selves, the people whose voices had been silenced for so long. When the interview began, Jamal found himself in front of a live studio audience once again. The host, Amanda, greeted him warmly. "Jamal, it's such an honor to have you here today. Your TED Talk really sparked some important conversations. I think a lot of people have been blown away by your message. Tell us, how did this all start for you?" Jamal smiled, the familiar nerves bubbling up in his chest. Thank you, Amanda. It really all started when I realized how much I had been hiding parts of myself for years. I was ashamed of my accent, thinking that it made me less capable, less American, somehow. But the more I started to own my voice, the more I realized that I wasn't alone. There were so many people who felt the same way, who were hiding parts of themselves because they didn't feel accepted. And that's when I decided to speak up. Amanda nodded, clearly moved by his words. It's incredible how many people you've touched with your story. But I'm sure not everyone agrees with your message. You've faced some criticism, right? Jamal's smile wavered slightly, but he nodded. Yeah, definitely. And that's been tough. People like Marcus, people who think that speaking in a certain way is the only proper way to communicate, often don't understand the deeper issues behind language and culture. It's not just about sounding correct, it's about feeling proud of who you are and where you come from. It's about taking ownership of your voice. Do you think people will ever fully accept this idea? Amanda asked. Jamal paused, considering the question carefully. I think it's a process. Some people might never understand, and that's okay. But I believe that as more and more people start to speak out, as more stories like mine are told, the more others will begin to see. And that's how change happens, slowly, but surely. The interview went on, and Jamal spoke about his journey, the ups and downs, and the importance of embracing not just one's accent, but every part of their identity. As he wrapped up the interview, Amanda smiled at him. Jamal, you've certainly given us all something to think about today. Thank you for sharing your story. Walking off the stage, Jamal felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. Every interview, every speech, every conversation, it all felt like one piece of a much bigger puzzle. There were still people who didn't understand, but there were so many more who did. And that was enough to keep him going. As Jamal left the studio that day, he received a message from Amina. She had been following his interviews, and she had a simple note of encouragement. Keep pushing, Jamal. You're changing the world, one voice at a time. Jamal read the message, his heart swelling with gratitude. No matter how many doubters he faced, the voices of those who believed in him were the ones that kept him grounded. The journey ahead was still long, but he was more determined than ever to continue the fight, for himself, for his community, and for everyone who had ever felt silenced. The weeks that followed Jamal's interview on the talk show were a blur of press interviews, social media interactions, and countless emails from supporters. His message about accent pride was spreading, slowly but steadily, to a larger and more diverse audience. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Jamal had never anticipated how quickly his life would change, or how many people would latch onto his message, seeing in it something they'd long needed but never quite found. As his platform expanded, Jamal found himself constantly grappling with the new demands of his growing fame. It wasn't just about the speeches anymore. It was about the pressure to represent an entire movement, one that was deeply personal to him but now extended beyond himself. Jamal knew he was at the center of something bigger than he could have ever imagined, but the weight of that responsibility was beginning to take its toll. One afternoon, he found himself walking down the street, his phone buzzing constantly in his pocket. He'd stepped outside for a moment of quiet after another full day of interviews and speaking events. The constant attention was exhausting, but it was a small price to pay for the impact he was having. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice calling out his name. Jamal. Hey, man. He turned to see Darius jogging toward him, a wide grin on his face. Darius was Jamal's old friend from college, a guy who had always been the life of the party and someone Jamal hadn't seen in months. It was good to see him, even though Jamal had been so consumed with everything going on that he hadn't had time to check in with his old friends. Darius. What's up, man? Jamal said, offering a handshake. Not much. I've been following your whole TED Talk thing. Dude, you're blowing up. Proud of you, man, Darius said, slapping Jamal on the back. Jamal smiled, but something about the way Darius said it made him pause. He could sense that Darius, like many others, hadn't quite grasped the full scope of what Jamal was doing. "Thanks, man. It's been crazy. But you know, it's been a lot, too. It's not all just good stuff, you know." Jamal replied, running a hand through his hair. Darius looked at him, his expression curious. "What do you mean? You're everywhere right now, you're making a difference. Isn't that what you wanted?" Jamal sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, but it's not that simple. I mean, people are starting to listen, but at the same time, it feels like the more I talk about this, the more I'm just expected to be this symbol, you know? I didn't sign up to be the voice of a whole movement, Darius. I'm just a guy who wanted to be proud of who he is." Darius nodded slowly, clearly thinking it over. "I get it. I mean, I can't imagine the pressure. But, Jamal, think about how many people you're helping. How many people feel like they can't talk about stuff like this? You've given them a voice." "I know, but at the same time, I feel like I'm losing myself in all this. It's like, the more I give, the more people take from me. I'm not sure who I am anymore outside of this whole accent pride thing," Jamal admitted. Darius paused, letting the words sink in. "Man, I don't know what it's like, but I can see it's hard. Maybe you just need to step back for a minute, take a breath. You don't have to carry all of this on your own." Jamal appreciated Darius's perspective, but there was a part of him that couldn't stop. He felt like he had a duty to finish what he had started, to not let this movement fade, to not let the people who had supported him feel abandoned. He was so deeply intertwined in this mission that it felt like his identity was almost defined by it. That evening, after his conversation with Darius, Jamal found himself sitting alone in his apartment, staring at his phone. The flood of messages was unrelenting. One message stood out to him more than the others, a direct message from a young woman named Kiera. "Hi Jamal, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm 17, and I've always been ashamed of my accent. People always make fun of me for sounding different, and I used to think that meant I wasn't good enough. But your TED Talk made me realize that it's okay to be myself. You gave me the courage to speak up for the first time today, and I just wanted to thank you for that. You're a role model, and I hope one day I can be as brave as you." Jamal stared at the message, his heart heavy with emotion. This was why he was doing it. This was why the pressure, the late nights, the endless conversations, this was all worth it. He wasn't just changing his own life. He was changing the lives of so many others. Kiera's message, though just one among thousands, was a reminder of why he couldn't stop now. Still, the pressure continued to build. He was getting invitations from major companies to consult on diversity and inclusion. There were talks about writing a book. There was the idea of expanding his advocacy into a nonprofit. Jamal didn't know how to juggle it all. More importantly, he wasn't sure how to keep going without losing himself in the process. A week later, Jamal made a decision. It wasn't about stopping. It was about shifting his approach. He was going to take a step back, not from the cause itself, but from the overwhelming nature of the work. He needed to reconnect with himself before he could keep pushing forward. He called Amina, his closest confidant, and explained how he was feeling. "I think I need a break," Jamal said. "Not from what I'm doing, but from all the noise. It's just too much right now." Amina, who had always supported him unconditionally, listened carefully before responding. "Jamal, I think you're right. You're doing incredible work, but it's okay to take a step back and recharge. You can't pour from an empty cup, you know." Jamal let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Thanks, Amina. I needed to hear that." The next few days were spent in a quieter space for Jamal, away from the cameras, away from social media. He spent time with his family, took long walks, and even revisited old hobbies he hadn't touched in years. It wasn't a long break, but it was enough to remind him of who he was before the spotlight, and to remember why he had started this journey in the first place. When he returned to the public eye, Jamal felt more grounded. He was ready for whatever came next. He knew the road ahead would still be full of challenges, but he had found a way to keep himself whole in the process. His mission hadn't changed. He was still fighting for the recognition and celebration of everyone's voice, no matter how it sounded. But this time, he was going to make sure he didn't lose himself along the way. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jamal sat in his small office, the door closed to block out the hum of activity outside. It had been a month since his brief retreat from the public eye, and he felt more focused, more aligned with his purpose. The phone on his desk buzzed with a new notification, and he glanced down at it. It was an email from an organization he'd never heard of, an international advocacy group focused on the empowerment of marginalized voices. Dear Jamal, we've been following your journey with great interest. Your TED Talk has sparked meaningful conversations, and your approach to the challenges surrounding cultural identity and accent pride is inspiring. We believe your voice would be invaluable as a keynote speaker at our Global Empowerment Summit in Berlin this fall. We would be honored to have you join us in shaping the future of this movement on an international stage. Jamal's heart raced as he read through the email. This wasn't just another local speaking engagement. This was a global stage, an opportunity to bring his message to an entirely new audience. His mind immediately raced with possibilities. If he could reach international communities, perhaps he could finally break through some of the cultural barriers that held back his message. But then, as quickly as the excitement rose, doubt crept in. Berlin. International audiences. The stakes felt so much higher now. He'd already faced criticism at home, and he knew that going global would only increase the scrutiny. Would people from different cultures even relate to his message? Would they understand the nuances of what he was fighting for? The phone buzzed again, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Amina. I saw the email. You have to do this, Jamal. This could be the next big step for the movement. You're ready. Jamal leaned back in his chair, considering her words. Amina was always the optimist, the one who saw potential in every challenge. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was the next step. He responded to the email, accepting the invitation. The decision felt right, but there was a lingering feeling of unease that Jamal couldn't quite shake. The weeks leading up to the Global Empowerment Summit flew by. Jamal found himself immersed in preparing for the speech he would deliver in Berlin. He spoke with Amina regularly, brainstorming ideas and refining his message. Despite the growing tension in his chest, the weight of responsibility seemed to drive him forward. In the days before the summit, Jamal took a trip to visit his family. He needed a moment of clarity before stepping onto an international stage. His mother's home was quiet, and the familiar sounds of her cooking in the kitchen helped ground him. As he sat at the kitchen table, she looked up from chopping vegetables and smiled warmly. Something on your mind, Jamal? She asked. He hesitated but then let the words spill out. Mom, this is huge. I mean, it's one thing to speak to people who get it, but, what if I fail? What if they don't understand what I'm saying? What if they don't care? His mother set the knife down and walked over, taking a seat beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Jamal, you've already won. You're not doing this for them, you're doing this for you. You're doing this for every person who's ever felt like they don't belong, who's ever been told their accent or their identity isn't enough. You're doing this to give them the courage to stand tall in their own skin. Jamal nodded, taking in her words. But it's so much bigger now, Mom. The world feels so different. I don't even know where to start. His mom smiled softly. Start by being yourself. You've always been enough. You've always had what it takes. And if they don't understand your message, that's okay. You've planted the seed. Now let it grow. The flight to Berlin was long and tiring, but Jamal felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt before. He wasn't sure what awaited him on the other side, but he knew he had made the right decision by coming. This was his chance to show the world that his accent, his culture, and his story were worth celebrating, not just in his community but everywhere. When Jamal arrived at the conference center in Berlin, he was greeted by a team of organizers who made him feel welcome. The event was massive, with people from all over the world gathering to discuss issues of empowerment, equality, and social justice. There was something electric in the air, as if the room was buzzing with the potential to create real change. Jamal's speech was scheduled for the following day, but before that, he attended several panels and sessions, listening to speakers from countries and cultures that were unfamiliar to him. There was so much to learn. He listened to a speaker from India talk about the struggles of language and identity in a post-colonial world. Another speaker from South America shared her story of fighting for indigenous language rights. Everywhere Jamal turned, people were talking about accents, about voices that had been marginalized, about the importance of owning your identity. He realized then that his message wasn't just about accents. It was about embracing the parts of yourself that the world tried to erase or diminish. It was about standing firm in the face of anyone who tried to tell you who you should be. This wasn't just his fight. It was everyone's fight. That night, Jamal sat in his hotel room, reflecting on everything he had heard. He was no longer nervous. He wasn't just representing himself or his community, he was representing something much bigger, something global. The responsibility felt heavy, but the passion in his chest burned brighter than ever. The next day, Jamal took the stage at the Global Empowerment Summit. As he stood before the massive crowd, he took a deep breath, looking out at the faces before him. Some were familiar, others were new, but all of them were here for one reason, to listen. He began his speech with the same words he had used in his TED Talk. When I was growing up, I was told that my accent was a barrier to my success. That it made me less capable, less worthy of being heard. But I'm here today to tell you that our accents, our voices, are not something to be ashamed of. They are a part of who we are. And they deserve to be celebrated. The crowd was silent at first, absorbing his words. And then, as Jamal continued to speak about the power of self-acceptance and the importance of owning your identity, something extraordinary happened. People began to nod in agreement. The energy in the room shifted. This wasn't just an American message, this was a message that resonated with people from all walks of life. Jamal spoke with conviction, drawing on the stories he had heard in the past days, stories from people whose voices had been silenced by colonialism, by discrimination, by prejudice. His message wasn't just for people with accents, it was for anyone who had ever felt less than because of who they were. As the speech came to an end, Jamal was met with a standing ovation. The roar of applause echoed in his ears as he stepped off the stage, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He had done it. He had shared his message with the world, and the world had listened. The aftermath of the Global Empowerment Summit was nothing short of surreal. Jamal's speech in Berlin had garnered more attention than he ever could have imagined. Within hours, clips of his address were circulating across social media platforms, shared by people from all corners of the globe. The response was overwhelming, with thousands of messages pouring in from strangers expressing their gratitude, sharing their own stories, and even offering invitations to collaborate. For the first time since his TED Talk had gone viral, Jamal felt like his message had truly reached the people it was meant for. He had crossed cultural boundaries and bridged gaps he never thought possible. It wasn't just about accents anymore, it was about identity, belonging, and the strength of embracing who you were in a world that constantly tried to tell you to be someone else. A week after the summit, Jamal received a phone call that would mark a new turning point in his journey. It was from a well-known publishing house that had been following his work. They wanted to offer him a book deal. Jamal, we've seen how your TED Talk and your summit speech have resonated with so many people. We believe your message is more than just a talk, it's something that needs to be shared in a deeper, more permanent way. We would love to discuss the possibility of you writing a book, the editor said, their voice warm but professional. Jamal was stunned. He had never considered writing a book. The idea of distilling everything he had learned, all the stories he had heard, and the lessons he discovered into a single work felt daunting. He wasn't a writer, he was just a guy with something to say. But then he thought back to the messages from Kiera and others who had reached out to him. These were people who had been inspired by his words, people who had found strength in his story. Perhaps this was another way he could help. Perhaps this was the next step. I'd be honored to discuss it further, Jamal finally said, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and excitement. Let's talk. As the months passed, Jamal dove into the process of writing his book. He was paired with a ghostwriter who helped him shape his thoughts into a cohesive narrative. The book, which would be called Voices Unheard, The Power of Embracing Your Identity, was set to explore the themes he had spoken about in his talks: overcoming shame, accepting one's identity, and celebrating the uniqueness of every voice. It was a deeply personal project, one that required Jamal to revisit some of the most painful moments of his life, the moments when he had first internalized the idea that his accent made him less than others. Writing the book was cathartic for Jamal. It gave him the space to reflect on his journey, to acknowledge the ways he had grown, and to come to terms with the parts of his past that still haunted him. There were times when the process felt therapeutic, as though he were having a conversation with his younger self, reassuring him that everything would be okay. The book also became a way for Jamal to solidify his message for future generations. He wasn't just speaking to the people who were listening to him now, he was speaking to anyone who had ever felt silenced. He wrote about the power of language and the cultural significance of accents, explaining how these elements were deeply connected to personal and collective histories. He wrote about his own struggles with self-acceptance, how he had once wished he could just change his voice to fit in, but how he had learned that true power came from embracing his authenticity. The writing process wasn't without its challenges. Jamal found himself constantly wrestling with doubts. He feared that people would misunderstand his message, that his book would be dismissed as just another self-help guide, or that people would accuse him of oversimplifying complex issues. He had never been someone who saw himself as an expert on identity or language. He was just a person who had lived through these experiences and had learned to find strength in them. But every time doubt crept in, he would remember the emails, the messages, and the people who had told him how much his words had meant to them. He realized that his story was worth telling, not because he was special, but because his experiences were shared by so many. One evening, as Jamal sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the final draft of the manuscript, Amina called. "Jamal, how's it going with the book?" she asked, her voice full of anticipation. It's coming along. I'm almost done. I can't believe it's finally happening," he said, closing his laptop and leaning back in his chair. "But I'm scared, Amina. What if people don't get it? What if I'm just making it all worse by putting it out there?" Amina paused for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Jamal, I get that. It's a big step, and it's normal to feel that fear. But think about why you're doing this. You're not writing this for the critics or for the people who don't understand. You're writing this for the people who need to hear it. For the people who feel like they don't belong. You've given them a voice, Jamal. Now you're giving them something they can hold on to." Jamal let out a long breath. "I guess you're right. It's not about them. It's about us. It's about everyone who has ever felt like their voice didn't matter." Amina smiled on the other end of the line. "Exactly. And once it's out there, it will do its job. The right people will read it, and it will change them. Just like you're changing the world one step at a time." As the book was finalized and sent to press, Jamal felt a new kind of anticipation. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about creating a legacy, about contributing to a movement that transcended any one person. The book would become a tool for change, something that could help others learn to value their own voices. The launch event for Voices Unheard was scheduled for a few months later, and the excitement surrounding it was palpable. Jamal knew that his life would continue to evolve as his platform grew, but for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace with what he had achieved. His journey had been difficult, filled with moments of doubt and self-questioning, but now, as he prepared to share his story with the world in a new way, he knew that the ripple effect of his message was just beginning. The day of the Voices Unheard book launch arrived, and Jamal was a bundle of nervous energy. He sat in his living room, wearing his best suit, but somehow still feeling out of place in it. Amina had texted him earlier, reminding him to take a deep breath and enjoy the moment. He smiled at his phone, but it didn't stop the anxious fluttering in his chest. This was the next big step in his journey, and it wasn't just about the book, it was about everything he had fought for, everything he had become. The launch was being held at a local bookstore, a well-known independent shop in the heart of the city. The event was set to be more than just a signing, it was going to be a celebration, a gathering of people who had been following his story. There would be music, food, and a panel discussion that Jamal had organized, where he and other speakers would talk about the themes of the book, identity, empowerment, and the importance of embracing one's true self. As Jamal stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, he thought back to the early days of his journey. He remembered how small everything had felt then, how each step forward had been fraught with fear and uncertainty. It was hard to believe that this was where it had all led, the book, the viral TED Talk, the international stage. He had come so far, but he knew that there was still so much more to do. "All right, Jamal," he whispered to his reflection. "Let's do this." The bookstore was packed when Jamal arrived, the crowd buzzing with excitement. There were familiar faces, friends, family, and supporters who had stood by him since the beginning, and new faces, too. People who had been inspired by his TED Talk, by his message, and by the way he had used his own story to ignite a fire in others. The air was thick with anticipation, and as Jamal entered, the room went silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the applause began, building in intensity until it was a full-on cheer. Jamal smiled, a mix of humility and disbelief washing over him. He had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was happening, it felt surreal. He made his way to the front, where a podium stood, flanked by a stack of books ready to be signed. Before the panel discussion began, Jamal was invited to speak. He stepped up to the podium, taking a moment to look out at the crowd. The faces in front of him represented everything he had hoped for: diversity, unity, and a shared commitment to embracing one's true self. His message had resonated with people from all walks of life, and that, more than anything, made him feel like this journey had been worth it. "Thank you, all of you, for being here today," Jamal began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This moment, this book, is not just mine. It's ours. It's the culmination of so many stories, stories that are often overlooked, voices that are often silenced. When I first started on this journey, I never imagined that I would be standing here today, surrounded by so many amazing people who believe in the power of our voices." He paused, looking out at the crowd, allowing his words to sink in. "I wrote this book because I wanted to create something that would live on long after the TED Talk, long after the viral videos. I wanted to create something that would continue to spark conversations about identity, about self-acceptance, and about the strength that comes from owning who we are. This book is for every person who's ever been told that they don't belong. It's for every person who has ever felt less than because of the way they speak, the way they look, or the way they identify. This book is for you." The room was silent again, but this time, it was a silence filled with understanding. Jamal could feel the weight of the moment, the collective sense that everyone in the room had been touched by the very thing he was speaking about. They understood. They were there because they knew what it meant to be heard. The panel discussion that followed was even more powerful. Jamal sat alongside a group of diverse speakers, each of whom had their own story to tell about the struggle for identity and acceptance. There was Mei, an activist from China who had fought for the rights of Mandarin speakers in international spaces. There was Ahmed, a poet from Egypt who had faced discrimination because of his accent when speaking in English. And there was Layla, a teacher from South Africa who had devoted her life to helping students feel proud of their African heritage and languages. As they spoke, Jamal realized just how interconnected their struggles were. Despite the cultural and geographical differences, the essence of their experiences was the same. They had all been told that who they were, where they came from, or how they spoke was somehow wrong. Yet here they were, sharing their stories, lifting each other up. The conversation that followed was rich with insight. They talked about the importance of embracing accents and languages as part of one's cultural identity, the need to fight against societal pressures that demanded conformity, and the ways in which each of them had found strength in owning their heritage. Jamal shared his experience of growing up in a world that often tried to erase the uniqueness of his background, and how, through his TED Talk and his subsequent work, he had come to realize that the way he spoke was a gift, not a burden. The audience was captivated, many of them nodding in agreement, others wiping away tears. For Jamal, this moment felt like a culmination of everything he had hoped for. The book wasn't just an object to him, it was a tool for transformation, a bridge to understanding that connected people across cultures and borders. As the event came to a close, Jamal stayed behind to sign copies of Voices Unheard. The line of people waiting for his signature seemed endless, but he didn't mind. Each person who came up to him had a story, a connection to the message he had shared. Some thanked him for inspiring them to embrace their own accents, while others shared how they had struggled with the same feelings of being othered because of their language or background. One woman, her eyes red from crying, looked at Jamal as she handed him her book. "Your words changed my life," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so many years trying to hide who I am, but after hearing your talk, I realized I don't have to. I'm proud of my accent. I'm proud of where I come from. Thank you." Jamal felt his heart swell. This was why he had done this. This was the power of sharing your truth, of standing up for who you are. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition, it was about the people whose lives were touched along the way. As the event wound down, Jamal stood on the stage one last time, looking out at the crowd. The room was quieter now, but the energy remained. It was the energy of change, of voices being heard, of people standing taller than they ever had before. Jamal smiled to himself, knowing that this was only the beginning. The success of the Voices Unheard launch spread like wildfire. Jamal's book hit the bestseller lists within the first week of release, and he found himself doing interviews with media outlets from all over the world. Radio shows, podcasts, and television appearances were now part of his everyday routine. At first, he had been overwhelmed by the attention. But as the days turned into weeks, Jamal learned to navigate the demands of his newfound fame with a grace he hadn't known he possessed. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. They didn't just recognize his face, they recognized his message. In the streets, in cafes, on public transportation, Jamal was approached by people who had read his book, watched his TED Talk, or listened to his interviews. Some shared their personal stories with him, telling him how his words had helped them find the courage to accept their own accents, their own backgrounds, their own identities. Others simply thanked him for opening their eyes to the power of diversity and authenticity. Though Jamal was often humbled by the interactions, there was one particular encounter that stood out. It was a rainy afternoon in New York City, and Jamal had just finished a book signing at a major bookstore in the heart of Manhattan. As he was heading toward his car, a young woman approached him. "Mr. Jamal, I just wanted to say thank you," she said shyly. "I read your book a few weeks ago, and it's helped me so much. I'm from Korea, and I've always been ashamed of my accent when speaking English. But reading about your journey made me realize that my voice, my story, is worth sharing." Jamal smiled warmly, stopping in his tracks to face her. "Thank you for telling me that. Your voice is absolutely worth sharing. And the world needs to hear it." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded before giving him a hug. "You've given me so much confidence," she said softly, then quickly disappeared into the crowd, leaving Jamal standing there, moved by the encounter. The success of Voices Unheard did not go unnoticed in the business world. A publishing company offered to partner with Jamal on a speaking tour, organizing a series of events across the country. They wanted him to be the face of a campaign promoting diversity in the workplace, encouraging companies to embrace accents, cultures, and backgrounds in their hiring practices. At first, Jamal was hesitant. He had always seen himself as an advocate, not a corporate spokesperson. But as he thought more about it, he realized that the platform he had been given was a powerful tool, one that could influence people on a much larger scale. If he could use this opportunity to push for real, systemic change in the way businesses approached diversity and inclusion, perhaps he could make a lasting impact. Okay, Jamal told the team. Let's do it. But I want to make sure this isn't just about ticking boxes for companies. I want real change, real commitment to celebrating diversity, not just talking about it. The team assured him that they were on the same page, and soon Jamal was preparing for his first major speaking event with several top executives from companies known for their global presence. He was nervous, but determined. He had learned how to speak from the heart, and now it was time to use that gift to shift mindsets in boardrooms and offices across the country. The speaking tour kicked off in San Francisco, where Jamal was introduced to a packed audience of business leaders. The room buzzed with energy as he took the stage. It was a different crowd from his book events, more formal, more reserved, but Jamal was undeterred. His message had resonated with millions, and now it was time to bring that same message to a space where change could truly happen. Good morning, everyone, Jamal began, his voice strong and confident. I'm honored to be here with you today. We're here to talk about diversity, about inclusivity, and about what it means to truly embrace who we are. I know that many of you have heard the buzzwords, diversity and inclusion, but today, I want to challenge you to think deeper. It's not just about hiring people from different backgrounds, it's about celebrating those backgrounds. It's about creating an environment where people feel empowered to speak their truth, to bring their full selves to work, without fear of being judged for their accent, their appearance, or their culture. Jamal paused for a moment, making eye contact with the audience. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, to be dismissed because of the way I speak. I've been in rooms where my voice wasn't valued simply because of my accent. But I'm here to tell you that my accent is not a weakness, it's my strength. And so is yours. It's time we stopped seeing differences as obstacles and started seeing them as assets. The room was quiet as Jamal spoke, and for the first time that day, he could tell that the executives in front of him were listening, not just hearing, but truly listening. As the tour continued, Jamal's influence began to grow even more. The company he had partnered with shared his speeches and ideas on their corporate social media channels, encouraging businesses to take action in building more inclusive workplaces. More and more corporations reached out, asking him to speak at their conferences or offer advice on how to improve diversity initiatives within their organizations. Jamal's voice, once dismissed and mocked, had now become a symbol of empowerment. But even as his career expanded and his message continued to spread, Jamal never lost sight of the roots of his mission. He still made time for the people who had supported him along the way, his family, friends, and the community that had helped shape him. He would always remember the feeling of sitting in the apartment with Amina, talking about his dreams and fears before any of this had started. He owed so much to those who had helped him along the way. As he reflected on his journey, Jamal realized that the true power of his success wasn't in the accolades or the recognition. It was in the moments when he had touched someone's life, when he had made someone feel seen and heard. Every time a person shared their story with him, every time someone told him that they had found strength in his words, Jamal knew that the ripple effect he had started was only just beginning. He had gone from the boy who was mocked for his accent to the man who had transformed that same accent into a powerful force for change. And as he looked ahead, Jamal knew that the future was filled with even more possibilities where every voice, no matter how different, could be heard, respected, and celebrated. As Jamal continued his speaking tour and expanded his influence, he found himself growing increasingly reflective. The whirlwind of interviews, panel discussions, and events had consumed much of his time, but there were moments, quiet moments in hotel rooms, on airplanes, in the early hours of the morning, when Jamal's mind would wander back to the past. It was in these moments that he thought about his family, his upbringing, and the struggles he had faced. He thought about his mother, who had always encouraged him to speak his truth, even when the world didn't seem to care about it. He thought about his father, who had often been absent but who had still left a mark on his life, shaping Jamal's views on perseverance, hard work, and resilience. Most of all, he thought about the community that had helped him find his voice. But there was one part of his past he hadn't truly addressed, the part that had shaped him into the man he was today but had also haunted him for years. The part of his life that had begun in the shadows, in a place where pain and doubt had festered. Jamal's thoughts often drifted to his childhood in the rough neighborhood of Southside Chicago. It was there that he had first encountered the feeling of being an outsider. He had been different from the other kids, not just in the way he spoke but in his demeanor, his sense of ambition, and his yearning for something more than what his environment seemed to offer. The mocking laughter, the taunts, and the unspoken prejudice had made him question whether his dreams were even worth chasing. The neighborhood had been unforgiving, and it had shaped him in ways he didn't fully understand until later in life. One night, as Jamal sat alone in a hotel room in Boston, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his sister, Tamika, who had been following his journey from the very beginning. She was the one person who had always believed in him unconditionally. "Hey, Jamal. How are you doing? I was thinking about you today. I know it's been a whirlwind for you lately, but I just want to remind you to take care of yourself. You've come so far, but don't forget to check in with the people who've always had your back. Love you." Jamal smiled at the message, but as he set his phone down, a sense of longing overcame him. He hadn't seen Tamika in months, and even though they kept in touch regularly, something about her message hit him harder than usual. Maybe it was the weight of the success he had achieved or the realization that despite everything, he still felt disconnected from the people who had been there when he was just a kid trying to make sense of his world. He picked up his phone again, this time dialing his mother's number. It rang a few times before she answered, her voice as warm as ever. "Jamal. My baby, how are you?" she said, with a hint of that familiar laughter that always made him feel at home. "I'm good, Ma. Just, a little tired," Jamal replied, though his voice betrayed the heaviness he was feeling. "I've been thinking a lot about the old days. About how things were back when we didn't have much, but we made it work." There was a pause on the other end, and Jamal could almost picture his mother's thoughtful expression. "You know, Jamal, those times weren't easy for any of us. But I always told you, didn't I? That you had something special. That you could do anything if you put your heart into it." "I know, Ma," Jamal said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But sometimes I still feel like that boy who couldn't catch a break. The one who was too different, too quiet, too unsure of himself." His mother's voice softened. "You're not that boy anymore, Jamal. You're a man who has changed so many lives. You've become a voice for people who thought they didn't have one. Don't forget how far you've come. The struggles, the pain, it's all part of what made you who you are." Jamal closed his eyes, allowing her words to wash over him. For so long, he had carried the weight of his past with him, the feeling of inadequacy, the fear of not being enough. But hearing his mother's voice, hearing her reassurance, reminded him that he had never been alone in this. He had come so far, and even though the journey was far from over, he had the strength to keep going. Later that week, as Jamal walked through the bustling streets of New York City, preparing for his next event, he found himself thinking about those early days in Southside Chicago again. The street corners, the beat-up basketball courts, the worn-down buildings, it all felt like a lifetime ago. But the memories were still there, etched into his mind, pushing him forward. It was during one of his walks that he unexpectedly ran into an old friend, Trey, from his childhood. Trey had been one of the kids who had once mocked Jamal for his accent and his quiet demeanor. But the look on Trey's face when he saw Jamal was one of awe, not disdain. "Jamal? Is that really you?" Trey asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Jamal smiled, a little hesitant but proud. "Yeah, man, it's me." Trey took a step back, looking him up and down. "I gotta admit, I didn't think you'd make it. I used to joke about you being a soft kid back then. But damn, you've really done it, huh? TED Talk, book deal, all of that. Jamal nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Yeah. It's been a crazy ride. But I never forgot where I came from. I still remember all the things you said back then, the way you laughed at my accent. But it's funny, Trey. I'm proud of it now. Trey looked down, shame flickering in his eyes for a brief moment before he looked back up at Jamal. I was wrong. I was just too scared to let myself be real. But I've been watching you, man. And you've made me think. Maybe there's more to me than just fitting in. Jamal placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder, a gesture of reconciliation. We all have our struggles. But it's never too late to start being who you really are. That evening, as Jamal prepared for his next speaking engagement, he thought about the powerful moment with Trey. It reminded him that people could change, and that even the most unlikely places could spark the beginning of something transformative. Trey had been one of the many voices from his past that had tried to silence him. But now, years later, he was recognizing Jamal's message, how important it was to embrace who you are, even when the world told you not to. Jamal realized that the journey to self-acceptance was not linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and echoes from the past that tried to pull him back. But in that moment, standing on the streets of New York, he knew that he had found his voice, and that his past, with all its pain and struggles, had only made his voice stronger. Jamal's life was unfolding in a way he had never imagined. What started as a personal struggle to accept his own accent had become a platform to challenge the way the world perceived voices, cultures, and identities. But despite all his success, Jamal knew that this journey had only just begun. He had touched so many lives, yet there were still so many more who needed to hear his message. And as he stood in front of a packed auditorium in Los Angeles, preparing for another speaking engagement, he couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, the pressure to inspire, the desire to uplift, and the hope that his words would lead to real change. He had given countless speeches before, but something about this particular event felt different. The anticipation in the room was palpable, and Jamal could sense that the audience wasn't just interested in his story. They were looking for something deeper. They were looking for answers. As he walked onto the stage, the audience greeted him with applause, but Jamal's mind was racing. He had always been an advocate for authenticity, for people to embrace their true selves without fear. But as he stood there, under the bright lights, Jamal felt an unexpected sense of vulnerability. For a brief moment, he wondered if the people in the crowd would be disappointed with what he had to say. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. The room was silent as he began. I've spent my life trying to be heard, Jamal began, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. I've spent years fighting to be seen, to be understood. And it wasn't until I realized that my accent, my background, and everything that made me different, those were the things that made me unique, that I found my voice. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, giving the audience a moment to absorb the depth of his statement. See, for a long time, I was ashamed. Ashamed of how I sounded, of the way people would judge me for the way I spoke. I thought that in order to fit in, I had to sound like everyone else. But what I've learned is that fitting in isn't the goal. The goal is to stand out, to be unapologetically yourself, no matter who's watching. A ripple of nods moved through the crowd, and Jamal could feel the shift. His words were resonating with them, but he knew he needed to go deeper. I've been there, Jamal continued, his tone growing more passionate. I've been the kid who tried to hide his accent, the one who felt less than because of the way I spoke. And I'm sure many of you have felt that way too, in one way or another. But let me tell you something, I'm here today, not because I tried to blend in, but because I embraced what made me different. I embraced my voice. And that's the message I want to leave with you today. Jamal could see the faces in the crowd light up as they began to connect with his words. He knew he was speaking to people who had faced similar struggles, people who had been silenced by society's standards of normalcy. This wasn't just about his journey anymore, it was about theirs too. "There's power in your voice," Jamal said, his voice filled with conviction. "There's power in your accent, in your story, in your background. No one can take that away from you. And no matter how hard the world may try to make you feel small, I want you to remember one thing: you are enough. You've always been enough." The room was quiet for a moment as the weight of his words settled in. Jamal's heart swelled with emotion as he saw the expressions on the faces of those in the crowd, tears in some eyes, smiles in others, but all of them understanding. They understood what he was saying. And for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt a deep sense of purpose wash over him. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about every single person who had ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or dismissed because of who they were. After the event, Jamal stayed behind to meet with some of the attendees, as he always did. He'd always believed that the real power of his message came not in the speech itself but in the connections he made afterward, the personal stories shared, the moments of vulnerability where people opened up about their struggles. One woman, in particular, stood out to him. Her name was Sophia, and she approached Jamal with a hesitant smile. She was in her late 20s, with a soft voice and a nervous energy about her. Jamal recognized that look immediately. It was the same look he had worn all those years ago when he was unsure of himself. "Hi," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to thank you for everything you said today. Your story really hit home for me. I've always been ashamed of my accent. I grew up in Mexico, and when I moved here, I tried so hard to hide it, to sound like everyone else. But after hearing you speak today, I don't know. I feel like maybe I don't need to hide anymore." Jamal smiled warmly, his heart swelling with pride. He knew exactly what she was going through. "Thank you for sharing that with me," he said gently. "I know it's not easy to accept something that others might see as different, but trust me, your accent is a part of who you are. It's something to be proud of. And once you start embracing it, you'll realize that the world can't help but notice you. In the best way possible." Sophia's eyes brightened, and she gave a small nod, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "I think I'm ready to stop pretending. Thank you." Jamal felt a lump form in his throat. He had heard stories like this before, but each one still struck him deeply. These were the moments that made all the struggles, all the mockery, all the pain worthwhile. He had found his purpose not just in speaking, but in connecting with people on a level so raw and real that it left him humbled every time. Later that night, as Jamal sat in his hotel room, he reflected on the day's events. His speaking tour had opened doors to so many incredible conversations, and he realized how much he had grown along the way. What had started as a personal battle with self-doubt had turned into a movement, a mission that was about more than just accents. It was about identity, belonging, and the power of self-expression. Jamal closed his eyes, grateful for the journey he had undertaken. But he knew that this was just one chapter in a much larger story, one that was still unfolding. There was so much more to be done, so many more voices to amplify. And with every step, he was getting closer to his ultimate goal, a world where everyone, no matter where they came from or how they spoke, could be heard, seen, and respected. The weeks following Jamal's powerful speech in Los Angeles were a blur of interviews, media appearances, and continued speaking engagements. His TED Talk had reached millions of viewers, and his message was being shared across the globe. But with the newfound fame came an unexpected burden, the relentless pressure to always be on, to always have something profound to say, and to never show any cracks in his armor. Jamal had worked hard to get to where he was, but he was beginning to feel the weight of it all. The constant stream of requests, the expectation to always perform, to always be the voice for those who had been silenced, it was exhausting. And it was wearing on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. As much as he appreciated the positive feedback and the gratitude people expressed, there were times when he felt like he was losing himself in the process. There were days when he just wanted to disappear for a while, to take a break from the constant spotlight, and to breathe without the weight of expectation pressing down on him. But he didn't feel he could afford a break. He was on a mission, one that meant everything to him. People were depending on him. He couldn't let them down. Or so he told himself. It was one of those quiet moments, after a long day of media interviews, when Jamal found himself in his hotel room in San Francisco, staring out the window at the city skyline. He hadn't felt this alone in a long time, and the silence around him felt suffocating. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he reached for it, hoping it was a message from someone he trusted. It was a text from Tamika. "Jamal, I know you're busy, but I just wanted to check in. You've been pushing yourself so hard lately. Don't forget to take care of you, too. You matter." The words hit Jamal harder than he expected. He'd been so focused on the outward appearance of success that he hadn't given much thought to how he was feeling inside. He had always tried to be the strong one, the one who didn't let his emotions show, the one who carried the weight for everyone else. But lately, that strength was starting to crack. Jamal sat down on the edge of the bed, his mind swirling. He thought about the long hours he spent preparing speeches, the constant travel, the late-night phone calls with sponsors and organizations. He thought about the faces of the people he had met along the way, Sophia, Trey, countless others who had shared their stories with him. They had trusted him with their vulnerabilities, and he had carried that responsibility with pride. But at what cost? His eyes landed on the framed photo of his family on the nightstand. His mother, his sister, his friends, they had always been there for him, supporting him even when he couldn't see the way forward. He owed it to them, he owed it to himself, to find balance again. With a deep sigh, Jamal stood up and walked to the small kitchenette in his hotel room. He poured himself a glass of water, then grabbed his phone again, dialing his mother's number. The phone rang several times before she answered. "Hey, baby. How's it going?" His mother's voice came through, warm and comforting as always. "I'm okay, Ma. Just tired." "Really tired," Jamal admitted, his voice soft. "I've been doing a lot, and I feel like I'm losing myself in it. I've been so focused on doing for others, and I don't know if I'm taking care of myself anymore." His mother's tone shifted immediately, a mixture of concern and understanding. "Jamal, listen to me. You can't pour from an empty cup. You've given so much of yourself to others, and that's incredible. But don't forget that you need to be kind to yourself too. Your health, your happiness, your peace, that's just as important." Jamal leaned back against the counter, his hand running through his hair. "I know, Ma. I've been so focused on my purpose that I didn't realize how much I've been neglecting myself. It's just, sometimes it feels like I can't slow down. People need me." "They need you, yes," his mother said gently, "but they need the best version of you. And you can't be that if you're not taking care of yourself first. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to say no. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Jamal's heart felt lighter as he listened to his mother's words. He knew she was right. He had always been so driven, so determined to make a difference, that he hadn't realized how much he was sacrificing in the process. "I hear you, Ma," Jamal said softly. "I just need to figure out how to balance it all. I don't want to let anyone down." "You won't let anyone down by taking care of yourself," she reassured him. "And remember, I'm always here. You don't have to do this alone." Jamal smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. "Thanks, Ma. I needed to hear that." After his conversation with his mother, Jamal took some time to reflect on the advice she had given him. He realized that he had been so focused on the external validation and the pressure to succeed that he had lost sight of the importance of his own well-being. He had been so busy helping others find their voice that he had neglected to nourish his own. It was time for a change. He made the decision that, for the first time in a long while, he would take a step back. He would carve out space in his schedule for himself, for rest, for reflection. He would reconnect with his roots and with the people who had always been there for him, his family, his friends, his community. He couldn't keep going at the pace he had been running. If he wanted to continue making an impact, he needed to be healthy, mentally and physically. Jamal knew that taking time for himself didn't mean he was abandoning his mission. On the contrary, it meant he was doing what was necessary to ensure he could continue the work he had started with the energy and passion it deserved. And as he looked out over the city from his hotel room window, Jamal felt a sense of peace settle over him. The world could wait a little while. For the first time in a long time, he was going to focus on taking care of himself. The decision to take a step back wasn't an easy one for Jamal. For someone who had spent the past few years fighting for his place in the world, it felt almost counterintuitive to slow down. The world, it seemed, was always moving forward. And Jamal knew there were still so many people who needed to hear his message, still so many changes he wanted to make. But deep down, he understood the importance of balance. He understood that he couldn't keep giving of himself if he didn't first refill his own well. In the days that followed, Jamal withdrew from the endless media appearances and speaking engagements. He still kept in touch with his team, but he made a conscious effort to disconnect from the constant pressure to perform. Instead, he focused on what truly mattered: his family, his friends, and most importantly, himself. The silence that once felt suffocating now felt liberating. Jamal spent more time with his mother and sister, reconnecting with his roots and his childhood memories. He went back to his old neighborhood in Brooklyn, revisiting the places that had shaped him, the corner store where he'd spent hours chatting with the owner, the basketball courts where he'd dreamed of a different life, the familiar streets that had always felt like home. There was something grounding about being back in Brooklyn. It reminded him of where he had started and how far he had come. The familiar faces in his old neighborhood greeted him with warm smiles and hearty handshakes. They didn't see the famous Jamal, the one who had spoken at TED Talks and written books. They saw the kid they'd grown up with, the one who had always been full of dreams and ambition. And for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt truly seen, not for his accomplishments, but for who he was at his core. One evening, after a day spent visiting old friends, Jamal found himself sitting on a bench at a park near his childhood home. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the skyline. Jamal watched as children ran across the field, laughing and chasing each other. It was the same park where he and his sister used to play, where they had dreamed of better days, of a future where they could escape the limitations of their circumstances. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through social media, as he often did when he had a moment of downtime. He saw the usual flood of messages and comments, fans expressing gratitude, people sharing their own stories, others asking for his advice. But one message, in particular, caught his eye. It was from Trey, the young man he had met at the speaking engagement in Los Angeles. Trey had sent Jamal a long message that began with, "Jamal, I just wanted to thank you again for what you said. Your words have made such an impact on me. I've been struggling with my own accent and feeling like I don't belong. But after hearing you speak, I realized that maybe I don't have to change myself to fit in. Maybe I can be who I am, with all my imperfections, and still be worthy of respect." Jamal smiled as he read the message. He had seen the change in Trey's eyes after the event in Los Angeles, but reading this message made it real. It was a reminder that the ripple effect of his words was far-reaching, that even in his moments of doubt, his story had inspired someone else to find their voice. Jamal quickly typed a response. "Trey, I'm so proud of you. You don't need to change yourself for anyone. The world needs your voice, exactly as it is. Keep being you. You've got this." He hit send and sat back, feeling a sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about the accolades or the fame, it was about the lives he touched along the way. That was the real victory. Over the next few weeks, Jamal continued to find peace in the quieter moments. He started to write again, not for a book, not for a speech, but simply for himself. He poured his thoughts into journals, writing about his experiences, his struggles, and his triumphs. Writing was a way for him to process everything that had happened and to reflect on the person he had become. He also began to reconnect with the people who had supported him from the very beginning, his childhood friends, his mentor Mr. Thompson, and, of course, Tamika. Tamika had always been there for him, and their bond had only grown stronger since they had first met years ago. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing at all, finding comfort in each other's company. They laughed about old memories, reminiscing about the days when Jamal had just been a kid with a dream, and Tamika had been the one to encourage him to chase it. One afternoon, Tamika called him. "Hey, Jamal," she said with her usual warmth. "I've been thinking about you. How are you really doing?" Jamal leaned back in his chair, looking out at the view from his apartment window. "Honestly, I'm doing better. Slowing down has been exactly what I needed. I've been spending time with my family, reconnecting with old friends, and just breathing. I'm starting to realize that I don't need to carry the world on my shoulders. I'm enough, just as I am." Tamika smiled through the phone. "That's so good to hear, Jamal. You've always been enough. And I'm so proud of you for taking care of yourself." Jamal's heart warmed. "Thanks, Tamika. I couldn't have gotten this far without your support." As the months passed, Jamal's journey took on a new rhythm. He continued his speaking engagements, but he was more selective about the opportunities he pursued. He was still passionate about his mission, but now, he was doing it in a way that allowed him to protect his peace. He found balance between the work he loved and the rest he needed. One day, as Jamal walked through the streets of Brooklyn, he saw a group of kids gathered around a small podium. They were practicing their speeches, their voices filled with excitement and energy. Jamal smiled as he watched them, remembering the time when he had stood in their shoes, when he had been the one with a voice that was unsure, a story that felt unworthy of being told. But now, as he looked at the kids, he saw something different in them. They had confidence. They had purpose. And they were learning the same lesson Jamal had learned so long ago: their voices mattered, no matter how they spoke, no matter where they came from. Jamal approached the group and smiled. "Hey, you guys practicing for a big speech?" One of the kids, a girl with curly hair and a bright smile, looked up. "Yeah, we're doing a talent show, but we want to make a speech instead. We've got something important to say." Jamal knelt down, meeting her eyes. "I like the sound of that. Keep speaking up, okay? Your voice has power. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." As he stood up and walked away, Jamal felt the familiar spark of hope ignite inside him. The ripple of change he had started was growing. And while his journey had taken unexpected turns, it was clear that the impact of his voice would continue to echo in ways he couldn't even imagine. The city lights of New York twinkled beneath Jamal as he stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, looking out over the skyline. The bustling streets below seemed like a distant hum, a world away from the stillness he had come to crave in the past few months. There had been a time when the noise of the world was everything he had wanted, when the hustle, the grind, the constant motion were what drove him forward. But now, standing on the rooftop, he felt something different. He felt at peace. The journey that had started with a single TED Talk, where he had poured out his heart and confronted the pain of being misunderstood, had evolved into something far greater than he could have imagined. He had started with one goal: to be seen, to have his voice heard, to make a difference. But in the process, he had learned that it wasn't about how loudly you spoke or how much attention you received. It was about the lives you touched along the way, the ripples you created, no matter how small they seemed. Jamal took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. It had been a year since his TED Talk went viral, a year since everything had changed. He had learned so much about himself, about the world, and about the people who had come into his life. He had learned that his accent, his voice, was not something to be hidden, not something to be ashamed of. It was part of who he was, part of his story, and he had the right to tell it in his own way. But it hadn't been easy. The journey had been filled with moments of doubt, moments when he wondered if he was doing the right thing, if he was saying the right words, if he was living up to the expectations others had for him. There were times when he had felt overwhelmed, when the pressure to be everything to everyone had threatened to crush him. But he had survived. He had grown. And now, he understood that true strength wasn't about perfection, it was about perseverance. He thought about the people who had supported him along the way, his mother, his sister, Tamika, and even the strangers who had reached out to him after his talk, sharing their stories and their struggles. It was their love, their encouragement, and their belief in him that had given him the strength to keep going. But more than that, Jamal thought about the kids he had met along the way, the ones who had come up to him after his talks, who had asked him questions, who had shared their own experiences with him. They were the future. They were the ones who would carry the torch, who would continue the work he had started. And as much as he had been their mentor, they had mentored him as well. They had reminded him why his voice mattered. They had reminded him that the fight for self-acceptance, for dignity, for belonging, it was ongoing. And they were ready to join him. The phone in his pocket buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Tamika. "Jamal, are you free tomorrow? I have something I want to show you. It's important." Jamal raised an eyebrow. Tamika was always busy, always on the go. If she wanted to show him something, it must have been significant. He quickly typed back. "Of course. What's up? Meet me at the community center at noon. You'll see when you get here." Intrigued, Jamal made a mental note of the time. He didn't know what Tamika had in mind, but whatever it was, he was ready. He had learned over the past year that it was the unexpected moments, the ones that didn't follow the script, that often held the most meaning. The next day, Jamal arrived at the community center a little before noon. He had visited this place many times, volunteering to mentor kids, hosting workshops on public speaking, and helping with community outreach programs. It was a place close to his heart, a place where he had made real, lasting connections. Tamika was already there, standing by the entrance with a wide smile on her face. When she saw him, she waved enthusiastically. "Hey, Jamal. Come on in," she called out. He walked over to her, his curiosity piqued. "What's all this about, Tamika?" "You'll see in a minute." "Trust me," she said, grinning. She led him through the building, past classrooms filled with kids working on various activities, past the gym where a group of teenagers were practicing basketball. The place was alive with energy, and Jamal couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia for the days when he had been one of those kids, searching for a path, looking for a way to make his mark. Tamika stopped in front of a large, open room where a group of young people were gathered. They were sitting in a circle, but what caught Jamal's attention was the large banner hanging on the wall. It read, "Find Your Voice, a workshop on public speaking and self-expression." His heart skipped a beat. The workshop title was familiar, it was something Jamal had talked about doing for years but had never gotten around to. And here, in front of him, was a group of kids, young people who had probably faced the same struggles he had once faced, wondering if their voices mattered. "Wait a minute. Is this?" Jamal asked, his voice trailing off in disbelief. Tamika nodded. "Yep. It's your workshop. I've been working on it with the community center. These kids need someone like you, someone who's been through the journey, to teach them how to use their voices. You've inspired them more than you know." Jamal felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the faces of the young people before him. They were eager, ready to learn, and hungry for guidance. And here he was, standing in front of them, exactly where he needed to be. He smiled, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. This was the moment he had been waiting for. It wasn't about fame or accolades anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about giving back, about sharing his story and helping others find the courage to share theirs. "Okay," Jamal said, stepping forward. "Let's get started." And as he spoke to the group, Jamal realized that this was the full circle moment he had been seeking. He wasn't just mentoring others anymore, he was learning from them, too. Together, they would create something bigger than themselves. Together, they would change the world, one voice at a time. The room was filled with the sound of laughter, encouragement, and the excitement of discovery. Jamal's heart swelled with pride as he watched the kids share their stories, find their voices, and step into the light. For the first time in a long time, he knew exactly where he was meant to be. The journey had been long, and at times, uncertain. But in this moment, surrounded by those who needed him, Jamal knew that everything he had gone through, every challenge, every doubt, every triumph, had led him here. And this was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?